or black people or others. So even in secular societies, we do recognize this. But what I object to in the question of our moderator when he says Islamic people, the word Islamic means people who are behaving in an Islamic way. He say Muslim masses. And not all Muslim masses responded in the same way you described to the issue of Rushdie. The problem is that the media does not expose the other side of reaction. Only once did the Time magazine care to say that many religious scholars, including the prestigious University of Al-Azhar and many other Muslim scholars all over the world, disagreed with the kind of statements that came from Iran concerning Rushdie. Right here in North America, and I happen to be a participant of a committee of Muslim scholars from the whole continent who met and made a statement, and while condemning, of course, this kind of low attack by Rushdie, which is not an objective religious thing when you call Abraham bastard and all this kind of low language he used, while condemning that, they clearly, and it's on record, statement is available, disagreed totally with this inciting of violence in a way, as a way, it's a very poor way, an unwise way even to respond to that. But the media usually doesn't speak about that. But on the two other issues very quickly, the question of ending one's life. First of all, Islam prohibits suicide because you don't own your life. Life is a trust in your hand. You cannot abuse it. You cannot end it. It is not your property. It's a trust. Secondly, when it comes to euthanasia, there is a difference between active and passive euthanasia. Active euthanasia, like injecting someone like Kevorkian did, that is totally forbidden in Islam. Even if the person is suffering, maybe he gets reward for that suffering, he's compensated for it. You can reduce suffering by drugs or whatever, but not by killing the person, even if he asks for it. So that's regarded as a sort of suicide also, or killing if somebody else does it without his consent. But passive euthanasia, in a sense of not using the life support equipment in the case where there is no chance of cure and the person is practically brain dead. I mean, you can have brain death and there is no EEC waves at all showing. That means you could still keep the heart pumping. In a way like that, this is very artificial. And in that case, some Muslim scholars feel that the failure to use this equipment is not forbidden because the person will be simply let to die naturally because there is no way that he can recover anymore. As far as the issue of homosexuality, here I think methodology is very important. As we heard before, that within the Christian tradition, it's not only the biblical references, Hebrew scripture and the New Testament that's used, but tradition is also used as part. Here there may be some superficial analogy with Islam, but there is an important difference. As I mentioned earlier, that the primary sources of Islam are revelatory in nature and cannot be superseded or changed. The Quran and the teaching of the Prophet, the sound hadith. But on the other hand, in Islam also there is ijtihad, the application of reason to understand and implement those broad rules to new problems. However, and this is the point of departure, that in application of ijtihad in Islam, you don't say because society now tolerates a certain sin, then it's all right, let's accept it and look at it from a different perspective. No. Ijtihad itself is bound by the two primary sources, which means that if there is a clear and conclusive text in the Quran, and there is, that homosexuality is unnatural, that it is a sin, that it is, like the Bible also mentioned, was the reason for the punishment of people of Sodom and Gomorrah, then no person, no Muslim scholar or jurist has the right to say, well, maybe that's not valid today, because that means you're claiming greater wisdom than God himself. So yes, there is ijtihad, but again within bounds that does not contradict the clear text. In that case, it is a clear text. However, I hasten to say that while Quran condemned that very clearly, in no uncertain terms, there's no bones made about it, there is no provision in Islamic law for witch hunts and spying on people in their privacy in order to indict people. Which means that people could, if they are sinning, even though it's wrong morally, and they are not promoting it or doing it in public, they may get away with it. There is no provision that they could be hunted. But finally, I conclude on this issue by saying that the issue really is not legal punishment, even though in Islamic Sharia there are legal punishment for all kinds of things. But the issue really is education. And you find that all of these laws in Islam, laws and legislation, what is right, what's wrong, what's the punishment for this or that, were never raised in the first 13 years of the Makki period, where the emphasis was almost exclusively on aqidah, on belief, relationship with Allah. When people change, then their hearts will change, and then their action also will change. And in my humble view, it would be totally senseless, given the circumstances in North America. Suppose even you say, all right, we'll ask you to apply Islam in this country. Even if I had the authority to apply Islam in this country, I would not start by applying the penalty for adultery or fornication or homosexuality. Why? Because this was not the approach of Islam. I would begin by educating people first. Once they are educated, once they are given all opportunity to satisfy their instinctive need in a clean way, once they are motivated spiritually, the problem would disappear automatically. One final word on abortion and birth control. Just to complete the picture, since it was raised, the abortion is regarded as unlawful in Islam because it is interference in the creation of Allah. And the motto, it is my body, I do with it whatever I want, is totally contrary to the Islamic precept that your body is the ownership of Allah, it is a trust in your hand. Muslim scholars, however, have differed about the degree of gravity of abortion, whether it is before the spirit is breathed into the fetus, which is the more correct opinion, is 40 days of conception, that there is lesser sin in abortion before the 40th day, especially when there are extenuating circumstances like rape or incest. But in any case, abortion is permitted to save the life of the mother in any stage of pregnancy. As far as birth control is concerned, there is no problem that I know of, except when people take it as a national policy. But for individual cases, it was agreed to and consented to by the Prophet. When people feel they need to delay it or to try to delay it, there's no problem with that at all.
Thank you very much, sir. I personally have at least 4 or 5 questions to the Muslim side, but I'm going to just shut up now. Let the Christian side reply if they have any, and if not, I'll keep on.
Just one comment. As the name of Salman Rushdie and the satanic verses have come into the discussion, I think many Christians, while recognizing the deep offense to Islam, were also taken back by the way in which his crime was being dealt with. That is, it's difficult to see how even so grave a crime could be the object of a fatwa that opened him up to death and execution. And I would say if it was describing a difference in the Christian or an Islamic approach, maybe there is not time to go into this, the Christian approach would have been to deal with Mr. Rushdie in a pastoral way. That is, some experts in Islam and some imams would go to him and inquire into his motives. Was he greedy for money? Was it for vainglory? Was it to offend his... What was he trying to do? To ask him to consider all of the consequences of his actions and the offense that he was giving and the hurt that would be done, and then perhaps to appeal that he withhold publication or something of that. And only at that stage, if none of these things helped, then he could be excommunicated. He could be declared as being outside the community and no longer a Muslim, and I think he should be condemned and judged if that's the view of the Islamic community. But to put a death warrant on him, I think was very, very shocking to Christians. I'm glad to hear that not all Muslims agree on the severity of that.
Not only this, if I may add, just for the record, because I mentioned that very briefly before, I gave several lectures personally on that issue. And one of the points I raised in objection to the kind of so-called sentence, of course, some people might argue that this was only a religious opinion, but of course, coming from a head of a state or someone who's regarded as the supreme guide of a state, it carries more than just a fatwa or verdict. It might have perhaps a little bite into it. And 2 of the many reasons that other Muslim scholars raised in objection to this is, first of all, that you cannot apply Islamic law in Dar al-Harb, in non-Islamic jurisdiction. And Rushdie was a citizen of another country, namely Britain, no matter how grave what he said. Number 2, one aspect that is emphasized in the Quran, in Sunnah, and historically in Muslim behavior, even with their enemies, is to respect their commitment. They don't betray their commitment. You see what Salah ad-Din did versus what Richard the Lionhearted. Muslims have always been pressured by virtue of their scriptures, to respect their commitment. And since both Iran and Britain are signatories to United Nations,